Good morning. I'm going to analyse a game. This game was played in the 1899 6th New York Chess Congress between Jackson Whip Showalter and George Gossip. We're looking at it from Gossip's side because it's Gossip I want to talk about this morning. He wrote a very early chess book, very early American chess book called the Manual of Chess or something of that sort. I can't remember exactly. And the book at the time it was written was praised by Wilhelm Steinitz. So if you're writing a book, and I'm not sure if he was then the world champion or former world champion, but it doesn't make any difference. If I wrote a book and the world champion or the previous world champion said this is a good book, you should read it, I'd be very, very happy. And I'm sure George Gossip was very happy. But he wasn't just a chess writer. He wrote for lots of newspapers. He started lots of activity in chess in America, but he was also a chess player. Unfortunately, the thing for which George Gossip is most famous is coming in last place in many, many tournaments. In this tournament, he came equal 17th, 18th out of 20 players. And it's considered his best ever result. Because it was a very, very strong field, and he got 35%. He did finish higher in the first Australian Championships when he heard that Australia was holding an Open Chess Championship. He decided to take the time to travel there, and of course, in his days, that was by ship and took a considerable amount of time. He done that, and he came second, but the competition was considered fairly weak since it was in the infancy of organised chess in Australia. Luckily, Gossip wasn't just that funny old man who kept coming last. He did play some absolutely wonderful games. It was like he had these moments. I think, from what I understand, he tried to play beautiful attacking chess all the time. And not every game you're going to play is well suited to a beautiful attack, sadly. You can't, if you try and play a beautiful attack every time, you're going to end up like Gossip and keep coming last, keep getting beaten. But Gossip was lucky that sometimes he managed to produce a sparkling attack, and this is one example of one of his sparkling attacks. His opponent, Jackson Whip Showalter, was also known as a good attacking player. But okay, let's see what happens. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, all very normal so far. Scotch game. Yeah, there's lots of responses. I think the most common response is to take the pawn and then play bishop to C4, bishop to C5. That's the classical variation. But that's not what happens here. The pawn is taken. White takes the pawn back, so he's not playing the Scotch gambit with bishop c4 or the Goering gambit with f3. He's just playing the normal Scotch game. And there are lots of choices here. I think Ben Hunt, Chess Bootcamp, always plays the Steinitz, queen h5. It's a good move. As I said, the bishop c5 is the classical, but there are others, and Gossip chooses the variation which I play at the moment against the Scotch gambit. How long that's going to last, who knows? I have this thing of changing what I do fairly regularly. So he plays knight, the so-called Schmidt variation. He goes to attacks a pawn instead of defending things or he develops a piece and attacks the pawn at the same time. Showalter takes. Now I know in many of these kingside openings you're playing queen's pawn takes knight to establish a majority on the queen side, which might be easier for you to create a pass pawn than it is for black to create a pass pawn in an opening. But in this case, you're going to lose your queen and your castling rights, and that is maybe just a bit too high a price to pay for the queenside pawn majority. So Gossip correctly takes with the bishop's pawn, b pawn. defends the pawn. I think it might be a bit unnecessary to defend the pawn, since taking the pawn is probably what white wants, because you're exposing yourself to a quick attack by castling and so on. So maybe a bit of a waste of time defending the pawn, but okay. If he hadn't played bishop there, when he plays pawn here, he is threatening to take the pawn. And he would be quite happy if you take the pawn, because then he takes back with his queen's pawn, repairs his pawn structure, and has the only pawn in the centre, so that's good. So Showalter doesn't do that. He plays e5, but whether I've played d5 or not, I'm always happy to see e5, because it does a couple of things. It guarantees that I'm going to have a majority of pawns on the queen side. I've got 4, my opponent can only ever have 3. It makes it nearer to me creating a passed pawn, and it concedes the e5 square for one of my pieces eventually, if I can get there. Just, it seems a little bit slow and inaccurate to me. So there are three main choices. You can play the queen, you can play the knight, or you can play the knight to g4 as Gossip does. I'm not such a big fan of playing to g4, because in reality you don't want to be taking that pawn on e5, because you're exposing your king by taking the pawn. If you could get castled first, yeah, well then you might be in a position to take the pawn and be a pawn up. So he castles, bishop developed, and now black is ready to castle. If black castles, then taking the pawn on e5 is really good idea, because once you castle, the knight can't be pinned anymore, so great. Bishop to f4. This is the first of a number of time wasting moves, sadly, by both sides. Why is this a waste of time? Because, as I've said, black doesn't want to take that pawn, so why should you want to defend it? Why can't you follow the conventional wisdom and play the knight first, because you know where it wants to be? But there's another disadvantage of playing the bishop out first, is that black hasn't yet committed to short castling. That means that he can't afford to move his kingside pawns without exposing himself to a kingside attack, and that's exactly what he does. He plays pawn to g5, and the bishop has to go to, well, it could have gone to b2 in the first place before black played g5, so he's wasted a move, or given black the move g5 for free. Now this is risky play, but because the bishop pins the f pawn, he might get away with it. I say might, it isn't guaranteed, but of course he puts his knight straight into a pin. So how does he answer that pin? By putting his queen behind it, now pinning his knight to his queen. So it's very risky play. I think king to f1, f5, bishop to g3, queen to e2 can all be very productive moves here. But he develops his knight, there's nothing wrong with that. The bishop comes to d7, great. Now he is developed, now he's ready to castle long if necessary. Now he threatens to play bishop takes pawn on g4. But if we count here, black has 7 pawns and white has 6, so white can afford to give away that pawn. It doesn't cost him anything. It doesn't cost him a pawn. So he castles long. Yeah, fine. And the pawn is taken, of course, and the knight is defended. This pawn does a couple of things. It opens up the second rank for the queen to come to g7 and to, and other things, and it chases away the bishop and makes some light coloured squares weaker for black. I think the idea of at some point playing bishop to g4 is very attractive. Once the bishop retreats, bishop to g4 might be good. Depends where the bishop retreats, obviously. If he retreats to h4, then bishop to g4 might make this pawn on f6 a little weak. So he plays bishop to g4, I think basically so that it isn't a weakness to play bishop to g4, supported in this case by the knight. So queen comes to g7, of course, and now if the rook comes to either rook comes to g8, he'll be threatening me. He's also threatening to play bishop to h3. For example, he can play bishop to h3 and then maybe play bishop to g4. So Showalter gives a check. Is this a waste of time? That bishop's not going to be staying there for long. No, it's not a waste of time. It forces black to move his king, but white doesn't gain anything by this check. He doesn't lose anything. He's still in a position to, wherever he moves his bishop now, if he was to move his bishop now, probably f1 is the best square for the bishop, then, the position is, the only difference is that if the king is now on b8, it would have been on f8. Is b8 a better square for the king? No. Is it more easily defended? No. So white isn't exactly losing time by inserting a check at that point in time, is really what I'm trying to say. So, two things with this bishop. First, it defends it threatens the knight, threatens to bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, queen takes knight, win a pawn for black. And secondly, it stops g8, rook g8 from being a mate threat because the rook sits in the way. So yeah, that's okay. Rook to g8, great move. Great move. He's saying, okay, take my knight. I'll say checkmate. So the queen retreats back to d1. I consider this to show that white has wasted time. If he hadn't played queen to h5 in the first place, there wouldn't be much difference. There wouldn't be a real improvement in the position for black from having played an improvement in the position for white. Yeah, so it's time wasting, if you ask me. And this as well is time wasting. This idea, it looks good. I'm going to threaten this pawn, I'm going to threaten this pawn, but really he wants to be pushing the h-pawn and getting the bishop out of the way. That's what he wants to be doing. And Showalter retreats his bishop, as I said before, to the best square. And Gossip comes straight back with knight to e5. So he's wasted a move, and that move white has used to put the bishop on f1, which is a better square. So yeah, time wasting. Threatens the bishop, threatens the queen. Great. When you're attacked, you can retreat, you can defend, you can take the attacking piece, or you can make your own attack. Obviously, if he takes the attacking piece, the bishop is going to be pinned to the king. So, not a good idea. He can retreat, but usually in these circumstances, it is better to go to attack than to retreat. So he goes to attack, and now he pins the knight to the rook and threatens to play bishop takes knight, creating a fork. Only really got one choice here, white, which plays queen b3. And now he can get on with his plan of chasing the bishop from the h-file. Now the idea of taking the pawn, here isn't any good, because taking the knight on the e5 isn't any good, because you can take with the pawn and the rook can't take back, and then you're just opening another file against your own king. So doubles up the queen and rook. Maybe he's thinking of playing a4, a5, b4, b5. I'm breaking open the b file and getting an attack against the black king. It looks a bit slow to me. So h4. The bishop can't retreat anywhere. As I said before, if he takes the knight on e5, then pawn takes knight is an improvement for the black side. But he can take the pawn on h4. It's undefended. Yep. But this leads to a fantastic attack by Gossip. Knight check. Yeah. If he takes, then he is in big trouble. You know, the rook can come to h8. The queen can come to h7. You know, he is in big trouble if he takes that pawn. If he takes, if he plays rook to king to h2, the knight takes the pawn, and then the rook comes to h7 will succeed in, rook to h8 will succeed in attacking the king. So he has to take the knight, but of course that allows him to say check. He can't move the king. If he puts the bishop in the way, the queen just takes, and that's mate. So he has to put the other bishop in the way. Surprise, surprise, the queen just takes. Why? Because the f pawn is pinned. So he takes with h pawn, and the rook just takes. So the rook takes h8 would be mate. There's a problem with that plan, that he plays king to h2 and threatens the rook. Black defends the rook, but there's a problem with that plan. The Showalter can put his rook in the way, and the check isn't there. His bishop in the way, and the check isn't there anymore. And he does put his bishop in the way, and Gossip takes it anyway. And of course, if Showalter takes the rook, then Gossip plays rook to h8. Fantastic checkmate. Yeah, lovely little sacrificial attack. And for me, considering his life and his career, I think it was really great to see that George Gossip succeeded in his attack on that day. What can we learn from this? Well, I think we can learn that if you want to go attacking your opponent every single game, it's not going to be a happy ending for you, because of course every single game is not suited to attacking chess. Some games require things other than attacking chess. But also, I think if we could ask Gossip now, okay, considering your chess career when you're famous for coming last all the time, was it worth it to sometimes produce a game like this? This is not the only fantastic attack he produced, but my favourite, maybe. I think Gossip would say, of course it was worth it. Of course it was worth losing all those games, losing all those tournaments, to produce something like this that people are going to be remembering 125, 130, maybe even one day 150 years in the future. Of course he would say it was worth it. So yeah, play your attacking chess. You might not get the results you want out of it, but who knows? You might produce something beautiful. It might not be something that's remembered in 150 years, but it doesn't matter. If you produce a moments of beauty, you produce a moments of beauty. Yeah, okay. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thanks. Bye.